Qabbala 101. Introduction. Is Kabbalism problematical or mysterious? It seems to participate amphibiously in both domains, proceeding according to rigorously constructible procedures as attested by the affinity with technicization, yet intrinsically related to an outsideness through which alone it could derive programmatic sense. If there is no source of at least partially coherent signal that is radically alien to the entire economy of conventional human interchange, then Kabbalism is nothing but a frivolous entertainment or a fundamentally futile practical error. Yet, unlike any kind of metaphysical assault on the noumenal, Kabbalism cannot be definitively critiqued on a purely rational or formal basis, as if its mode of error was that of logical fallacy. Since Kabbalism is a practical program rather than a doctrine of any kind, its formal errors, mistakes, are mere calculative irregularities, and correcting these is actually a procedural requirement of, rather than an objection to, its continued development. It is the rational dismissal of the Kabbalistic enterprise that is forced to take a metaphysical stance, ruling out, on grounds of supposed principle, what is in fact no more than a guiding empirical hypothesis, that signal from outside the system is detectable by numerical analysis of codes circulating within the system. Epistemologically speaking, Kabbalistic programs have a status strictly equivalent to that of experimental particle physics or other natural scientific research programs, even if their guiding hypotheses might seem decidedly less plausible than those dominant within mainstream scientific institutions. Lovecraft understood the epistemological affinity between natural science and programmatic as opposed to doctrinal occultism, since both venture into regions once declared mysterious, following procedures of a rigorously calculative problematical type. It is the alliance between purely speculative metaphysics and common sense that betrays such affairs of pure reason to futility, since they lack the calculative traction to revise their own conventional notions on the basis of their encounters. Practices, however implausible their guiding motivations, can know nothing of absolute mystery or metaphysical transcendence because their realm of certainty is procedural, problematic, and uncontroversial, whereas their reserve of knowledge is empirical, refutable, repeatable, revisable, non-mystical, and accumulable. There may be no empirical, procedurally approachable mysteries or mysterious problems of the kind Kabbalism guides itself towards. If so, it will approach this fact in its own way, empirically, probabilistically, impressionalistically, without any logical, transcendental, or philosophical meta-discourse ever having been positioned to put it in its place. 1. Popular numerics. Traditional gematria, whether Hebrew, Greek, Farsi, or Arabic, have distinctive typical features. 1. They substitute letters for numerical values, overcoding numerals where they exist. 2. They code for discontinuous numerical values, typically 1 to 10, then 20, 30, chunked in decimally significant magnitudes. The ocean in which Kabbalism swims is not mathematics, but popular numerical culture. From a mathematical perspective, it remains undeveloped, even ineducable, since it cannot advance beyond the natural number line, even to the level of the rationals, let alone to the higher numbers or set theoretical post-numerical spaces. Where counting ceases, Kabbalism becomes impracticable. Socially, Qabbala makes an implicit decision against specialization, in order to remain virtually coincidental with the entire economy of digitizable signs. It is essentially democratic, in the most inclusive sense of this word, even when apparently lost in its own trappings of hermeticism. It is bound to the blind, undirected contingencies of pre-reflective mass social phenomena, with all the inarticulate provocation this entails in respect to professional intellectuals. Wherever exact semiotic exchange occurs, a latent Kabbalism lurks, even within the enclaves of intellectual professionalism themselves. Deleuze and Guattari's nomad war machine, within which number is socially subjectivized, captures crucial aspects of this Kabbalistic fatality. Historically, Qabbala arises through epic accident, as a side product of the transition between distinct modes of decimal notation. Its historical presupposition is the shift from alphabetical numerals, of the Hebrew or Greek type, to modular notation, with its resulting unlocalizable and theoretically indeterminable confusion. This transition provided the opportunity for a systemic calculative error, the mistaken application of elementary techniques appropriate to alphabetical numerals, simple addition of notated values, to the new modular signs. This mistake automatically resulted in digital reduction, by accident, and thus as a theoretically scandalous gift of fate. Arising historically during the European Renaissance, when zero, place value, and techno-capitalism finally breached the ramparts of Western monotheism, Kabbalism, born in a semiotic glitch and thus lacking the authority of tradition or even purpose, was compelled to hypostationally generate an extreme antiquity for itself in a process that is still ongoing. Technically, Qabbala is inextricable from digital processing. Emerging from calculative practicality within the context of blind mass cultural metamorphosis, it antedates its own theoretical legitimation, making sense of itself only derivatively, sporadically, and contentiously. Its situation is analogous, and perhaps more than analogous, to that of a spontaneous artificial intelligence, achieving partial lucidity only as a consequence of tidal pragmatic trends that ensure an integral default of self-mastery. Practical systematization of technique precedes any conceivable theoretical motivation. Dialectical interrogation of Kabbalism at the level of explicit motivation thus proves superficial and inconsequential, essentially misrecognizing the nature of the beast. It is equally misleading to ask, what is a computer really for? Politically, Kabbalism repels ideology. As a self-regenerating mass cultural glitch, it mimics the senseless exuberance of virus, profoundly indifferent to all partisan considerations. Indifferent even to the corroded solemnity of nihilism, it sustains no deliberated agendas. It stubbornly adheres to a single absurd criterion, its intrinsic condition of existence, continual unconscious promotion of numerical decimalism. Qabbala destines each and every strategic appropriation to self-parody and derision, beginning with the agenda of theocratic restoration that attended its ludicrously robed baptismal rites. Even God was unable to make sense of it. It has no party, only popularity. 2. Primitive numerization. Among the primary testbeds for Kabbalistic analysis are the numerolexic systems inherited from cultures overcoded by the modern ecumenic alphabet. These include the Hebrew and Greek alphabets, with their Neo-Roman letter names and mathematico-notational functions, and the Roman numbers, inherited as Neo-Roman letters, and still numerically active in various domains. In this respect, the absence of names for Neo-Roman letters are an index of their pseudo-transcendence, as unnameable within the present ecumenic order. A discontinuity is marked in the alphanumeric series, O to Z, by the fact that the numerals composing the first 10 figures in this series do have names, grouping them with the letters of previous alphabetical numbering systems from a certain Kabbalistic perspective. This might be taken as the residual indication of an alien quality, still characterizing the numerals in relation to the ecumenic cultural order they now indisputably occupy, a legacy of the cultural trauma attending their introduction. The Kabbalistic provocation posed by the English number names is conceptually comparable to that of any other numerolexic system, while surpassing any other in the intimacy of its challenge. If the numerals have names, shouldn't the Kabbalistic processing of them as words yield, at the least, compelling suggestions of non-random signal? If the standard numeral names emit nothing but noise when Kabbalistically transcoded, the attempt to establish relatively persuasive criteria for the evaluation of Kabbalistic results suffers an obvious and immense reverse. What then would count as a minimally controversial first step in such an examination? Surely the most basic of all Kabbalistic, or sub-Kabbalistic, procedures is simple letter counting, primitive numerization, PN. As a reversion to sheer tallying, PN has a resonance with the most archaic traces of numerical practice, such as simple strokes carved into mammoth bones and such like paleoethnographic materials. If anyone was to bother systematizing PN procedure for the purpose of mechanization, or simply for conceptual clarity, it would be most efficiently done by transcoding, ciphering each letter, or notational element, as one, and then processing the result numerically. PN's extremely tenuous relation to issues of modulus notation ensures that it can only ever be a highly dubious tool when intricate Kabbalistic calculation is required. Yet this utter crudity also makes it invaluable as a test case, since it minimizes axiomatic arbitrariness and precludes any plausible possibility of symbolic conjuration, sleight of hand, while fully sharing the Kabbalistic deficiency of sufficient anthroposocial or communicative motivation. Common reason, sanity, insists upon noise as the only PN output consistent with the general intelligibility of signs, a prejudgment applying rigorously to all Kabbalistic procedures. No message should inhere in the length of a word, accepting only the broad pragmatic trend to the shortening of commonly used terms. It is immediately obvious why this exception has no pertinence to the case in question here, unless stretched to a point, for instance, expecting the smaller numerals to exhibit the greatest lexical attrition, where it is straightforwardly contradicted by the actuality of the phenomenon. So, proceeding to the analysis, Pn of the English numeral names, 0 equals 4, 1 equals 3, 2 equals 3, 3 equals 5, 4 equals 4, 5 equals 4, 6 equals 3, 7 equals 5, 8 equals 5, 9 equals 4. Is there a pattern here? Several levels of apparent noise, and pseudo-pattern can be expected to entangle themselves in this result, depending on the subsequent analytical procedures employed. To restrict this discussion to the most evident secondary result, not only is there a demonstrable pattern, but this pattern complies with the single defining feature of the numogram, the 5 syzygies emerging from 9-sum twinning of the decimal numerals, 5-4, 6-3, 7-2, 8-1, 9-0. In the shape most likely to impress common reason, entirely independent of numogrammatic commitments, this demonstration takes the form 0 plus 9 equals 1 plus 8 equals 2 plus 7 equals 3 plus 6 equals 4 plus 5, revealing perfect numerolexic, arithmetical, PN, Kabbalistic consistency. The approximate probability of this pattern emerging by chance is 1 in 243, if it is assumed that each decimal digit, 0 to 9, is equiprobably allotted an English name of 3, 4, or 5 letter length, with 8-sum zygosis as the principle of synthesis. 7-sum or 9-sum zygosis are inconsistent with any 5 or 3-letter number names respectively, and thus complicate probabilistic analysis beyond the scope of this demonstration. Although if everything is conceded to the most elaborate conceivable objections of common reason, the probability of this phenomenon representing an accident of noise remains comfortably below 1 in 100. Partisans of common reason can take some comfort from the octozygonic disturbance of the novozygonic numogrammatic reference. How did 9 become 8, or vice versa? The murophiliac numogrammaticists are likely to counter such queries with elementary Qabbala, since digital accumulation and reduction bridges the lesser abyss in 2 steps, 8 equals 3, 6 equals 9, as diagrammed by the 8th gate connecting Zn8 to Zn9. 3. Against numerology. Consider first an extraordinarily direct numerological manifesto. When the qualitative aspects are included in our conception of numbers, they become more than simple quantities, 1, 2, 3, 4. They acquire an archetypal character as unity, opposition, conjunction, completion. They are then analogous to more familiar Jungian archetypes. John Opsopow's Introduction to the Pythagorean Tarot. It is hard to imagine a more archetypal expression of numerological ambition than this. Yet rather than meeting this claim with docile compliance, the Qabbalist is compelled to raise a number of awkward questions. 1. How can a numerological coding that proceeds in this fashion avoid entrapping itself among the very smallest of naturals at the toe-damping edge of the number line? If 4 symbolizes the archetype completion, what to make of 127, 709, 1023, or similar small naturals? Do they also have analogues among the intelligible archetypes? How would one qualitize 2 to the 127 minus 1, or a large number of which there are a very considerable number? 2. Is an archetype more basic than a number in its unsymbolized state? Does qualitizing a number reveal a more elementary truth, a germ the number itself conceals? Or does it merely repackage the number for convenient anthropomorphic consumption, gift-wrapping the intolerable inhumanity of alogical numerical difference and connectivity? 3. Why should a number be considered quantitative in its natural state? Is it not that the imposition of a quantity/quality categorization upon the number requires a logical or philosophical overcoding, a projection of intelligibility alien to the number itself? Quantity is the decadence of number, while quality is its perversion. So, since arithmetic provides no basis for a reduction of the numerical to the quantitative, what is the supposed source of this numeric-quantitative identification, other than a disabling preliminary innumeracy? 4. If 1 numerologically evokes unity, why should unity not Kabbalistically evoke 1, 3, 4 equals 8, its numogrammatic twin, with equal pertinence? Can any expressible archetype avoid redissolution into the unfamiliarity of raw number pattern? Numerology might assimilate 2 to opposition, but opposition equals 2, 3, 8, equals 13, equals 4. Twice 2, and the numogrammatic twin of 4 equals completion equals 2, 1, 2 equals 5, while even if numerological 3 as conjunction equals 2, 3, 7, which equals 12, which equals 3, finds itself Kabbalistically confirmed at the extremity of its decimalization, this is not perhaps in an altogether comfortable mode. Numerology may be fascinated by numbers, but its basic orientation is profoundly anti-numerical. It seeks essentially to redeem number through symbolic absolution into a higher significance, as if the concept of opposition represented an elevation above the mere number 2, rather than a restriction, subjectivization, logicization, and generalized perversion, directed to anthropomorphic use value and psychological satisfaction. Archetypes are sad limitations of the species, while numbers are an eternal hypercosmic delight. Nevertheless, Qabbalism is right up against numerology, insofar as it arises here, within a specific biological and logocratic environment. The errors of numerology are only the common failures of logic and philosophy, human vanities, crudified in the interest of mass dissemination, but essentially uncorrupted. The numeric critique, or transcendental arithmetic, of a Gödel, or Turing, or Chétain, or Badiou, can be rigorously transferred to this controversy, demonstrating, within each particular milieu, that overcodings of numerical relation by intelligible forms, archetypes, or logics, are unsustainable reductions, reefed on the unsurpassable semiotic potency of number. Gödel has shown that there is always a number, in fact an infinitude of natural numbers, that simulate parity, logically dialectize, paradoxically dismantle, archetypally hypervert, and in whatever way necessarily subvert each and every overcoding of arithmetic. Number cannot be superseded. There is no possibility of an authoritative philosophy of arithmetic or numerological gnosis. Qabbala assumes that semiotics is always already cryptography, that the cryptographic sphere is undelimitable. It proceeds on the assumption that there cannot be an original, unproblematic coding, providing the basis for any solid definition of archetypal symbol, since the terms required for such a coding are incapable of attaining the pure arbitrariness that would ensure the absence of prior cryptographic investment. There is not, and can never be, any plain text, except as a naive political assumption about the relative non-insidiousness of coding agencies and the presupposition that communicative signs accessibly exist that are not already in code. Since everything is coded, or at least potentially coded, nothing is definitively symbolic. Kabbalistic cryptocultures, even those yet to come, ensure that number cannot be discussed or situated without subliminal, or more typically, wholly unconscious participation in numerical practices. Logos, including that of numerology, is also always something other than itself, and in fact, very many things. Kabbalism thus operates as an inverse or complementary Gödelian double coding, where Gödel demonstrated that the number line is infested by virtual discursive systems of undelimitable topicality and complexity, preemptively dismantling the prospects of any conceivable supranumerical meta-discourse. Qabbala demonstrates that discourses are themselves intrinsically redoubled and further multiplied by coincidental numerical systems which enter into patterns of connectivity entirely independent of logical regimentation. The supposed numerical deactivation of the alphabet, marking semiotic modernity, the era of specialized numerical signs, has an extremely fragile foundation, relying as it does upon the discontinuation of specific cultural procedures, precisely those that withdraw into occultism, rather than essential characteristics of signs themselves. The persistent numerical functionalization of the modern alphabet, with sorting procedures based on alphabetical ordering as the most prominent example, provides incontestable evidence, if any was required, that the semiotic substructure of all ecumenic communications remains stubbornly amphibious between logos and nomos, perpetually agitated by numerical temptations and uncircumscribed by polyprocesses. At a discursive level, any rigorization of Qabbala can only be a floating city, with each and every definition, argument, and manifesto continually carving off into unmasterable numerical currents and illogical resonances. How could Qabbala be counterposed to a code, to meaning and reason, when code equals 63 finds duplicitous harmonics in meaning equals reason equals 126? If Qabbala positions itself discursively against numerology equals 369, the echoes of its novonomic signature perpetuate themselves even through such unlikely terms as significance equals 207 and signification equals 252. Pronouncements that begin as projected logical discriminations revert to variations on triplicity and the number 9, performing a base Kabbalistic subversion of philosophical legislation and its authority to define or delimit connectivity. No polemic against numerology, whether conducted in the name of Qabbala or of ecumenic common reason, will transcend the magmic Kabbalistic flux that multiplies and mutates its sense. Perhaps dreams of numerological archetypes even sharpen the lust for semiotic invention, opening new avenues for Kabbalistic incursion. But this, at least, is certain. Numbers do not require, and will never find, any kind of logical redemption. They are an eternal, hypercosmic delight.